Welcome to the Monday Morning Edge writing session. I'm going to go ahead starting by writing my sharing my screen. So we'll just share that. There we go. Awesome. Awesome. So we'll get started. When I start my writing process, what this really looks like for me is this is a web page called Rome Research, or an app called Rome Research. And I've recently, for the last 14, 16 months, I've been using this service called Evernote right here. And you can see it, like since I started in October of 2019, I've saved, over 2,100 notes, and it's all sorts of things. So the way that I kind of set this up is this is using a framework from a guy named Tiago Forte, and he calls it his PARA method. So it's projects, areas, resources, and archive. And I've written about this in a post over my website called Building a DIY Second Brain. And it's how to organize kind of just like a creative or a knowledge kind of workflow, work environment. So in here, I didn't update this, this week or I really haven't updated it in a couple of weeks because I was making the switch over to Rome. But you see right here, I'm working on a long-term essay. Here's another long-term essay. Here's a few past newsletter editions that I use, and then I was kind of building something here that project actually didn't come to fruition. And then of course I have a couple other things, and these are projects that are more short-term, whereas an area is something that it's going to keep happening, right? So apartment, I could call this housing, and this is, details about my apartment and insurance and all that kind of stuff. I'm planning on being a part of baseball for a while. So here's all my notes on various baseball topics. I have a topic for various notes about Christian faith. There's just a lot of other things in here, and we'll come back to right here. So that's areas, and then we're looking at resources, and this resource tab it's literally just anything that like the resources tab is just anything that I find interesting. So for me as a coach, I'm looking into biomechanics, I'm looking into analytics, rehab, throwing, anatomy, analytics. Like there's a whole lot of stuff in here. And then if I scroll down, like I have a folder on Elon Musk, for example. I also have some stuff about golf and Jurgen Klopp. I mean, there's a whole lot of things in here, just kind of things that I'm interested in. And you can see that I have quite a few interests in some of these. Like this writing notebook has 61 notes, which is probably a pretty high amount for me. Some of those some of those notebooks have 1, 2, 3 notes, and it's just something that, hey, I came across this article, didn't really know where else to put it, so I just thought I would create a new notebook off that. And then come down here, this is my archive, and these are things that I've finished. It's projects that I've completed, maybe areas that are no longer relevant, that sort of thing. So this is what I've been working with for about 14 to 16 months. And hi, Caitlin, and hi, Chris. Really glad to have you here. Just walking through kind of my initial setup and what I'm doing. So typically, what I would do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a project. I'm going to create a project right here. I'm going to call it MME 12/7/20. And this is going to get dragged into my projects folder, or my projects stack. And then I'm going to go here, and you obviously see that there's nothing. So typically what I do when I'm putting together a newsletter is I just scroll through all my recent notes, just things that I've gone ahead and created, things that I've done. And I know that I wanted to include this. So this was an article that I shared kind of quietly, honestly, last week on social media. And it's this article I put together about what I call my personal operating principles. And I didn't share it in last week's newsletter. I just didn't feel like it felt the theme of what I was working on. So I know that I want to share that, but I'll actually come over to Rome because this is where I've moved to. So it's similar, but what Roam actually allows you to do is you can link these notes from just like across various topics, various other notes. So for example, I'm fairly new to this Roam thing, but I've been playing with it enough that I have a decent enough understanding. Is right here, we can come in, and I know that this note right here, I've actually linked to this topic called satisficing, which is a topic that I'm writing about in an article on, or I'm hopefully publishing it later today or tomorrow, and it's coming out in the newsletter on Monday. So I can click here, and what this does is it pulls together all of my notes that I've tagged with satisficing. Okay, and I'm just going to snap this to the side. Snap this. So this is the article draft that I've been working on. And you see here, if I go back to this note, so this note, Alchemy, the Dark Art and Curious Science, yada yada yada. That's actually a book. It's my favorite book that I've read this year. But if I come back, and I just want to show you kind of where I got this from. So if I go here and I search, I can do Command F or Control F if you're on a Windows PC, and I'm just going to search for darts. So right here, here's just a note that I took from that book, and it says another feature in the scoring system of many compelling games is where, right, yada yada yada, and it explains. So Rory Sutherland, who's the book's author, explains why darts and archery are very actually dissimilar, and how the two scoring systems kind of demonstrate two different ways to think about human decision making. So as I'm going through this, and this is really where my writing process kicks in. So what happens? I don't really just have ideas. I actually need to generate them, and I think that's pretty normal for everyone on this call. Is that we don't just sit down on our computer. We're like, I have an idea. We need to go through our notes. We pick things up from books we read, from experiences we have, from articles that we come across, videos we watch, whatever it is. So what I'm doing is I'm just going through this note. So when I start, I sit down in the morning, and I'm just going through this note, and I'm bolding things. I'm linking ideas, right? So um, so right here, this is something that I know Nassim Taleb, who's one of my favorite authors, has pointed out before. So I want to link that specific note to Nassim Taleb. And I'm really just going through, and I'm allowing, I'm creating these connections. Here's an article by a guy named Morgan Housel. So I want to link that to Morgan Housel, so that if I go to this Morgan Housel page, that will be on there, and I can review that. I can see maybe some cross-pollination between ideas. But I remember earlier this week, as I was doing this, I came down, and we're going to go to that darts example again. I was coming down, reading through this, and something just hit me when I was kind of in this section, and the author was talking about satisficing, which is this idea that instead of trying to maximize like your score in dartboard or in darts, it's actually better to satisfice, which means it's a combination of the words satisfactory and sufficient. And when you do that, you're probably not going to maximize, right? So you're not going to shoot for the triple 20 in darts, but instead you're going to shoot for like this area of the dartboard where it's 14, 11, 8, and 16. And because you actually have less variance, right? So if you miss ever so slightly aiming for this 20, you're going to hit 5 or 1, and that's really not that great of an outcome for most of us who aren't professional dart players. But if we can satisfice and aim for this side of the board, that'll actually help us to potentially beat our opponents. It's kind of like the tortoise and the hare idea, right? And instead of just going for triple 20s all the time, we just aim over here. Slow and steady wins the race. And as I was thinking through this, you can actually see the documentation of it right here. I went ahead and I just gave some examples of satisficing in coaching. It's like, oh, well, instead of trying to find the very best drill, maybe we should instead just find a drill that like is good enough, right? So another way to think about it is for squatting, right? So a lot of us, we program uh, athletes lifting programs, that sort of thing. And there's a lot of debate over like what squat variation is the best version. And instead, probably a better question to ask is like, are there any versions that are going to hurt the athlete, whether it's like leading to injury or performance? Maybe there's like a low bar back squat might not be best for an athlete, because that could put a lot of unnecessary tension and stress on the lower back that maybe that athlete just doesn't need. Maybe he has a history of low back issues, so maybe you want to program something more like a front squat or a kettlebell goblet squat or something like that. So I was thinking like, okay, we can actually turn that around and say, instead of trying to say what's the best version, it's like, hey, what are the bad versions? And then what do I have left to make a choice from? And then you just pick one. And that's really this satisficing approach. And what I realized is that satisficing is highly correlated and related to this idea of inversion, which I've written about before, in an article called let me pull this up, in an article called "How to Be an Anti-Coach" or an Anti-Coach, which is right here. So what happened is I had this idea, and I'm like, ooh, that's it. That's what I want to write about. So now what I can do is I know that I want to write about inversion and satisficing, which you see right up here. And I'm going to go ahead and click on satisficing. And here are just all of my notes that I've taken. So I went ahead and went over to Wikipedia, and just took some notes from there. And then, the other example of satisficing that I have is from Alchemy. So here's all of my notes from this article, or from on this topic. And as I'm writing this article, I'm really just going through and pulling things from here to here. And let me find a good example of that. So right here, under this a whole new, more realistic world, I say back in the 1950s, economist, political scientist, and cognitive psychologist Herbert A. Simon introduced the idea of satisficing. And you can continue to read that. But if you come over here, like this is I took that right from there. And it's writing for me is less about like creatively working through things. It's actually more about taking the Lego blocks, which are in my note-taking system, which are from pulling these various ideas out, and then just compiling them into something that's coherent, into something that is helpful, something that is good. So I wanted to stop here for a second and just ask if anyone had any questions. And if you don't, you can type no in the chat. Right. All right. Sounds good. So we'll come back. And if you have questions, oh, sorry about that. Mechanics is Rome. Yeah. So Rome. I'm trying it out for a month, but I can tell after about a week of trying it out so far, it's absolutely going to replace Evernote. And the reason for that is because the linking across ideas is so much easier in Rome than Evernote. Now, Rome is a little bit more complex. It's a little less intuitive. So if you decided to go that route, I would suggest there's a lot of YouTube videos on how to do it. There's a guy named Nat Eliason. So I just typed his name in the chat. But Nat Eliason does a lot of really good videos on how to use Roam. He has a course. It's $250. I personally have not purchased it yet. It's kind of, I'm debating, do I want to go that route, or I tend to want to try to figure things out myself. So I may go that route, I may not. But there is a slightly larger learning curve to that idea, or to Roam. But I think if you can do it, it seems like it's really going to help. I'm also going to send just right now a link in the chat of that initial article that I mentioned, building a DIY second brain. And this is something I put together. I pulled it from a lot of different resources that are available, freely available or cheaply available online. And this is really the system that I've just built out across Evernote for the last 16 to 18 months. So we'll come back to more questions. If you have any questions, just pop them in the chat, and I'd be more than happy to swing back with them after. So now you're probably wondering, like, okay, how does he get these notes into Roam or Evernote in the first place? And what I actually want to show you that now. So I think we're living in this really cool age where there's so much information available online, but we don't have a good way to capture that information. And my system costs. I mean, just this initial setup will cost something like roughly $100, which I know it's like, whoa, $100. That's a lot of money just for some like internet infrastructure. But if you really want to become a prolific writer, content creator, I think it's well worth. Excuse me. It's well worth the investment. So what I would do here, and we'll just pick a random one. So this is an article by Jack Hahn. He's a hockey coach, analyst, writes a really great newsletter. And I'm just going to go through. I've kind of skimmed this article before, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight this. Okay, so I'm going to highlight this. It's actually interesting. Ooh, that's not what I meant to do. So what I would be able to do if I knew how to do it, and this is unfortunate, I apologize for this, is I could go ahead and highlight this part of the article. Okay, and I'm not sure how to do that on my computer actually, but if you're using this service called Instapaper on your phone or your iPad, actually I know what we can do. This will be easier. So if we head over to instapaper.com, we can do this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to highlight this article. Okay, so I'm going to highlight that part, and let's just say I read through the whole thing, and I'm like, "Ooh, that's good." So what I'm going to do is head over to this service called Readwise. Okay, and Readwise is what takes my articles uh, from all my highlights from Instapaper, from Kindle. I mean, they have a whole lot of things. There's a podcasting app that I can connect like my highlights from my podcast listening to it as well. What I'm going to do is head over to Connect and Sync. And because I just synced my Instapaper, I'm going to click Sync now, and this happens automatically, but it happens on a designated timeline. Whereas if I want to highlight immediately, I actually have to go in and do this manually. But you see right here, it picked up the Three Dilemmas by Jack Hahn, and it's just going to go ahead. It's going to look for any other articles, which there aren't any, but it's going to say, okay, great, you now have that many highlights. You've added one new highlight. And what we can do is come over to Rome. We will look. Sometimes it happens right away. Other times we need to. Other times we would need to actually go ahead. Oh, there it is. Perfect. So you see right there, you going through Instapaper, Readwise, and now it's automatically uploaded right into my Rome account, right? And then I can go through. Let's say I want to make this stand out, so I'm going to bold that. And really that's what that note-taking process for me looks like. So on a typical day, when I show up to my computer in the morning, really what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm looking at my unprocessed notes. So just notes that I haven't done any annotating with, haven't done any thinking with. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to click, we'll pull up one that I know I haven't done anything with. I think this one is I've done a little bit with it, but what I would do is this is an article, really loved it, read it a couple weeks ago, and I'm just going to go through and process this. So is that all making sense, guys? Shoot me a question if you have any questions. All right, looks like we're all good. So we'll keep going. All right, so now I want to get to actually writing the newsletter, and this is enjoyable. This is something I really do enjoy doing. So what I've done, and I'll go back to that alchemy article to show you, is so I've gone through and I've designated certain notes, certain highlights as Monday morning edge colon 12/7/20. And what this does is it creates a page that all of those notes are on. So if I click into that, here's what I'm thinking for this newsletter. And fortunately, I kind of have a feel for what I want to do with this newsletter. But sometimes I get to Saturday morning, it's been a busy week, or I haven't really like had an idea that really leaps out to me, and I'll just go ahead and I'll work through that note taking, that annotating process that I mentioned earlier, and then I'm just kind of rolling through it. I'm like, hey, well, what is this? What's interesting here? Maybe what do I want to include? And then what I'll do is I will, I'll lock this on each side of the screen, and this is my newsletter draft. Okay, so what I do each week is I duplicate it off the previous one just for the sake of kind of like efficiency, I guess, and not having it look completely different week to week. But then I just go through and I'm going to delete the stuff from last week. Get rid of all this. All right, so it's just cleaning up from last week and being like, okay, don't need this anymore. Actually, and boom. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy this. The reason for that is last week I didn't have a new article last week. So I actually didn't have this section, this from Tanners.blog section. But this week I'm going to have an article. It's not finished yet, so I'm not going to put it in. But that's kind of where the newsletter starts. So right up here, I'm going to say, I start most newsletters with some sort of greeting or some sort of, introduction. So I'm going to say greetings from Charlotte, North Carolina. Let's see. And then I try to think about like, okay, what's a unique experience that I had this week. So I'm going to say, we had an incredible week at Tread Athletics. We had 3 new coaches or 3 new employees start with us, and the entire team brought a ton of energy all week long. We have some really cool things in the works, and I'll probably go back and edit this later. And we'd love for you to join us because we're hiring. So then I'm gonna just mark this as TK, and the reason I use TK is because that letter combination does not exist in the English language. So when I go through and at the very end of the article, all right, when I'm done with the article and kind of waiting for it, just like needing to get it over the finish line, what I can do is click Command F, and I can just search TK, and it'll show me all of these places that it's like, I think of it as like to come. So it's something that I need to do, but I use that TK designator so that I don't have to, go ahead and like go to the website, find our hiring link, and then, like report back. It's just like TK, insert Tread careers page link. Okay. And then I'm going to say, on Saturday morning, a handful of us gathered to write this newsletter together. If you'd like to go and check that out and watch the recording, that's what we'll say. It's up on YouTube.
Now we're going to be famous. All right.
Yeah. What's up, Greg? I recognize that voice.
Oh no! Now you're going to know me too well, eh?
But if you'd like to go and watch the recording, it's up on YouTube, and you can check it out now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to like hyperlink right there. So then we're gonna go through, and I'm gonna pull from Rome. And my idea for this newsletter is because this article is pretty linked in with Rory Sutherland's ideas, and I really appreciate Rory Sutherland's ideas. What I'm gonna do is I'm not gonna make it like an around the web section. I'm actually gonna make it like, so I'm thinking about something like, I want this to be coaching ideas from a British ad man. So Rory Sutherland, he's the, like, I don't know what his official title is, but he works at Ogilvy Advertising over in Britain, and he's, you know, very well known, has some very popular TED Talks, which, to be honest, I've never watched. I much prefer listening to his longer speeches, but his book is incredible if you haven't read it, which I haven't really run into any people that have, but if you haven't, I cannot recommend it enough, and I think it will be well worth your time and your money that you put into it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and we'll start it up by saying, you know, the best book I read in 2020 was undoubtedly Alchemy, and I really don't like typing that whole long title, so I just copy and paste that, by Rory Sutherland, British ad man, and I'll clean that up later with what his official title is. The book was written with more of a psychological bent to it, but as I tore through its pages, I couldn't help but notice the crossover between his ideas and what we do as coaches every single day. Below, I've included some of my favorite highlights from the book with the coaching application for those ideas. And you see, like, this process, it's kind of clunky. It's kind of, you know, there's never like, it's like step one, step two, step three. It's more just like compiling Lego blocks. And I think that actually allows for this to be more fun. If this was like step one, step two, step three, I'd probably get really bored with it. But instead, it's more of like a web and a network of ideas that just work together. And by doing that, it actually allows each week to kind of be a new experience for me. And I think it makes it more enjoyable for the reader as well. It's not just like, hey, you know, you're going to read this first, and you're going to read this, and you're going to read this. It's like, hey, you know, each week is generally the same thing, but the structure and kind of the ideas are different. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the notes. Ooh, I like this one. So I'm going to go ahead and copy. And then I just need to change some of the formatting. So the reason that Rome has these asterisks when I copy and paste is because Rome uses a language called Markdown to handle the formatting, right? So you see here, it's bold, and when you go in, if you're using something that uses Markdown, how you create a bold thing is you put asterisks. So you put two asterisks at the start of where you want it to go, and then you put two at the end, and that creates that bolding. So just wanted to read this. Sorry about that. So the problem that bedevils organizations once they reach a certain size is that narrow conventional logic is the natural mode of thinking for the risk-averse bureaucrat or executive. There's a simple reason for this. You can never be fired for being too illogical or for being too logical. If your reasoning is sound and unimaginative, even if you fail, it is unlikely you will attract much blame. It is much easier to be fired for being illogical than it is for being unimaginative. And I really like this idea. Let me sometimes ConvertKit gets a little funky, and I have to change the formatting. But as I was reading through this this week, I had this idea. It's like, has our obsession with data from the sports side actually put us in this weird bind where the only coaches who are going to keep their jobs are the ones who unthinkingly just like bow to the data, and they're like, well, the data told me to do it, or like, well, we got this guy. I'm thinking of pitching, so we got 2 extra inches of vertical break on his fastball. And there's probably hockey applications you can think of, Greg, but there's a whole lot of things where it's like we're so obsessed with the data that we kind of optimize for the data instead of optimizing for the whole. And the thing is, players are they're a complex system. Like each player is a complex system, and each team is a complex system. And one of the fundamental traits of complex systems is that if you optimize for anything, like for just one thing, you get that one thing at the expense of the others. Whereas if you optimize for the whole, you might not optimize for any single one area, but the whole becomes greater. And this is called emergence. It's this concept that there's actually emergent properties where something, if you optimize for the right thing, the sum of the parts becomes great, or the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. So what I'm thinking here is I can just go ahead and copy and paste this. So this is just my thought. So what we'll do is we'll say my take. So we'll go my take. Apologize for that. And right there, we've created our first quote. So now I'll go through, and I'm not just going to keep doing this on the video call. I think probably asking questions is a better use of our time. But you see here, it's only when we abandon a narrow logic and embrace an appreciation of psychological value that we can truly improve things. And then have some notes down here. And then for a coach, like my takeaway is for a coach to be truly player focused, he must ignore what his players say about their motivation. Instead, he needs to concentrate on what his players feel. And that's pulling from something, that he said earlier in the book. So this is a quote from just right up here. Let's see, where was that? 722. It's somewhere. But this idea came from just like a page earlier in the book. And it's that a business, to be truly customer focused, it needs to focus on what its customers feel, not what they say. And just working through that idea and like saying, okay, how does this apply to coaching? And really that's going to be the theme of Monday's newsletter is sharing some of these bigger ideas. So wanted to open it up. Any questions? Chris, I'm just seeing your comment. Does that all make sense now? You can unmute yourself. That's fine.
I'll follow up on your last point about focusing on one stat. So I have stats that I run for my team. We'd call it like puck touches, since I'm probably the only hockey guy here. So it's basically anytime a guy touches a puck, what does he do with it? Because we had turnover problems. We were making really bad decisions. So we had 2 metrics, turnovers and bad decisions or bad shots, whatever it may be. So what happens eventually is kids get used to that idea of holding onto the puck. Okay, well now they're holding onto it so much at the expense of creating things. So then we change the metric right before that happens so we don't get too safe.
Yep.
Like we want to hold on to the possession. That's the number one correlation with winning in hockey. So constantly changing that is something that we found successful. I'm not sure how that would work in like maybe a business setting, but for coaching,
Yeah,
just being able to switch that so they're not overly focused on one thing and one thing alone.
for sure. I love that. And Chris, good question. Do you enter a week thinking about the newsletter with a theme, or do you go with it as it comes? So I would say it depends. Some weeks I write, like, let's say I write the newsletter for Monday, and some weeks I'm like, I already know what I'm going to write about next week. Most weeks that's not true. Most weeks what I do is I pull articles that I've read throughout the course of the week, or books that I've read throughout the course of the week, or podcasts or whatever. It's like what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to turn what I'm doing just like throughout the course of my week. So podcasts I'm listening to, ideas that I'm having, conversations that I'm having. I mean, I had a conversation yesterday, it lasted 2 hours, and I have multiple ideas that I'm going to be implementing in a future newsletter, and I can actually show you some of those. Oh, I need to share my screen, don't I? So what I do, I'm on the phone. And I can go ahead and I have this kind of like shortcut built on Roam. And right here, here's two ideas from a phone call. Coaching is really hard, but it's way easier than we make it out to be. And that's just an idea. And what I can do is go in. I can say t.blog idea. And now what I'll do is I'll click on that page. I just made that page, but whenever I'm looking for inspiration for a blog, I'm always trying to. So this is kind of like the fundamental thing is like I'm always trying to do work now that will benefit me later. So when you have an idea, a lot of times we just have an idea and then we just let it go. And I think the really beautiful thing about ideas is that we all have a lot of ideas, but some of them, like, the ideas follow a power law where some of them are like, this is the greatest idea I've ever had, and then most of them fall off pretty quickly. But what we need to do is we need to capture all of our ideas, or as many as possible, so that we can tap into those ones that are the most valuable. And this one, like, to be honest, I don't really know if there's an article, like a worthwhile article to write with this idea. This might stay a tweet, to be honest. Like, I might just tweet this out, and what I'm looking for when I tweet that out is I'm looking for resonance. I'm looking for someone, or for people to say like, "Ooh, I like that," and then maybe there's some engagement, right? Maybe there's multiple people reply and they add their own thoughts. And in those cases, I'm like, okay, here's the article idea. And a lot of how I use Twitter is as a testing ground for newsletter and article ideas. And I actually think of it as a factory. So it's like when I bring in a new, when I bring in new highlights from a new post, I'm thinking, okay, what can I do? I want to do something with this, or is this something that's more of a slow burn approach? Is this something that's more, I'm just kind of like letting it simmer in the background and seeing if there's anything that's going to come out of this. And honestly, in most cases, it's there's really nothing. I might highlight, I read like an 80-minute article, a couple months back, and it took me multiple, sit down sessions to read through. And I got done, and I'm like, I don't really know if there's anything for me to write about here immediately. But what might happen is I might be writing a post about, anti-fragile, or like the concept of anti-fragility. And I might pull something from that article, and it's just a small quote. And that now became really useful because for me, the articles that I write and the newsletters that I send out are some of the highest ROI, like, activities that I do. And if I can just pull something together, and it's the Lego block concept, right? So if I can pull Lego blocks together to build something that is worthwhile, and something that I think is worth sharing, I mean, it's a huge win. So Chris, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, sorry, I got people sleeping here, so I'm trying to be quiet. But yeah,
No worries.
that was super helpful. I mean, it's interesting, right? Your process of writing is just like what you're just talking about, coaching, right? Sometimes we get in line with the analytics and lose the imagination. So just going
Yeah.
with it is an answer I really like and I subscribe to. So thanks.
Yeah, it's crazy how much I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. We've become so overly reliant on process, and like we're so obsessed with everything just needs like a 5-step process, when in reality it just doesn't. I think a better way to think about it is I create the structure and the framework within which I can then trust my intuition. I can like trust my creativity. And for me, it's the notes that I compile, right? It's pulling in all these different ideas from Evernote, or from Instapaper, from books, from yada yada yada, and pulling those together and then building something with that. So guys, I'm sorry to say we have less than a minute left. If you have any questions for me, please reach out via email. I'm more than happy to take the time. I am going to upload this to YouTube, so if you want to go back and rewatch it again, we can absolutely do that. But thank you guys so much for being here. This was awesome.
Thank you so much, Tanner. Take care.
Of course. See you guys.